Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a brand new titanium wood stove coming from Pomoly, and an accessory also goes with the stove, and you can double stack the stove twice as high. So let's get started right away. Okay guys, so first off we're going to start with the stove and then we'll move on to the accessory later on in the video. So let's get this bad boy out of the box. It is a very large package and there are a lot of goodies inside of here. So the first noticeable difference with the Pomoly stove is they have upgraded the carry bag. This is a very nice durable material bag with a full zip and carry handles. The old bag was paper material. It was more of a recycled paper. And it was more of a storage bag rather than a carry bag. This bag is very, very robust and very durable. You can carry and store your stove in this bag. Full zip, Pomoly branding, like I said, 2 handles on top, making this a very nice package to carry the stove with. Coming inside of the box, we have a ton of components. So first off, we've got our cut gloves, which are always handy for not cutting your hands on the sharp objects. We then have the grate. So I have 2 grills here, and these are upgraded from the last stove grills. And the way that they basically made them better was they threaded the ends. And we're going to talk more about the accessories a little later on in the video. But there are 2 grates with threaded ends. We then have the legs with rubber feet and the threads that correspond with the grate. We'll get that set up afterwards. We then have the damper piece, which is very common of Pomoly, the 3 holes, and the nice damper there. We have a brand new spark arrestor. So this is actually a new design from Pomoly. Very nice, sleek design. It's much lighter than the other spark arrestor, and it's got a great design. Now there are accessories that go with this inside of this bag as well. There are clips that actually hook on to the outside, allowing you to hook on guy lines as a stabilizer in high winds for your stovepipe. So there is that. Inside of the bag, we do have a hex wrench, a regular wrench for working on the stove, for tightening up some bolts. Over time, they do come loose every now and then. We then have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 titanium rings, and that is basically the accessory kit. We then have the stovepipe here with an additional ring. This, I believe, looks to be a 3-meter pipe. Now, we're actually going to be using a different pipe because this one is already pre-burned, but this one does need to be formed. I like using foam pool noodles to form it around there, and then once you get it on the stove for your first burn, it'll burn in the shape and you'll have memory in your pipe. That's the reason why I'm going to be using a pre-burned pipe for today's demonstration. So it does come with the pipe. And then getting into the stove. So let's get this packaging off the table and we'll talk about the stove. So it does come with these Velcro bound straps, which are very nice. Easy to store the stove, and they are branded with the Pomoly branding on it. I should mention that. It's upside down. Do have the Pomoly branding on there, so that's a nice little touch. And these really do make it easy to store the stove and to put the stove away. There are a lot of pieces to this, I will say that. So we've got those out of the way. So here is the lid. We got the Pomoly branding on the bottom, and this is a totally redesigned lid. So it does have the vents in the top with an additional screw for a damper, which we'll get into a little later on. But this is the new top with a built-in baffling system. Very strong reinforcements, and then you get your 3 screws for your damper. We'll set that off to the side. Opening up the stove body, it is a fast fold design, just like the standard T1 stove from Pomoly. We have one of the side panels. Now they've actually cut in Pomoly, and they have 4 vents cut in. That's because this new side panel is actually double walled. Turning it around, you can see the intake for all the holes on the top. So basically the air goes in through the bottom, goes up through the wall, and then enters the burn chamber inside of the stove through the top. And this prevents any embers from falling out of the stove via these holes. So these are double wall titanium, very strong, and it works really well. So we're going to get those off to the side as well. Now I do have a glass panel. Just let me open this up. I do have a glass side with this stove. So this is to the other side of the stove, and we're going to talk more about this once I undo the accessory box, because there are additional sides in there as well. So we've got 1 solid panel, 1 glass panel, And then we've got the stove construction itself. The front door does have a window, and the vents on the bottom open up for your air intake. In the back, we also have a reinforced plate of titanium, which also has fins to kind of distribute the heat. This is added to basically stop the back of the stove from deforming. And there are a lot of upgrades with this new T1 stove from Pomoly. So let's get the stove assembled, and then we can set it up and have a look at the overall dimensions and the overall features. Okay, so assembling the new stove from Pomoly, I'm going to start with the glass side. We'll just slide the glass side in here. First of all, you want to make sure that these fins are open. So these are the new locking tabs that they've put on the stove. And everything slides in. It's very, very simple. So there are grooves here that line up. You just want to make sure everything's lined up. Slide it into place. Give the front just a little push just to close the ends. I'm going to put the solid panel on the back side. So same thing, slide it in. There are reinforced tabs and locks that need to correspond. Once everything's corresponded, it lines up very nicely. We then take the lid, set the lid on top of the stove, making sure that your damper hole in your chimney exhaust is at the rear of the stove, of course. Line that up, and it is as simple as rotating these tabs shut. Get all 4 of them shut. I'm going to put the latch on the door, and then I'm going to turn it on its side. It does have folding legs, so we'll unfold the legs. And there we have the stove body assembled. Now we need to put our damper on, which is this piece here. There are 3 screws on top. I'm going to undo these screws. Simply place the damper straight into the hole. There are no locking fins, so this does just drop straight in. Very nice and easy once you get it lined up, just like that. Put your screws back in, and that gives you a nice secure attachment for the damper. And with the 3 screws being reinforced, it will hold the pipe, if I can find that other hole there, it'll hold the pipe steady in winds. Now, like I said earlier, with the new spark arrestor, where it actually has tabs and little pieces of hardware in here to basically hook on guy lines. So that'll help with the sturdiness of the chimney as well. And there we have the stove constructed. Let's move this pipe out of the way, move that off to the side. So here we have the basic construction of the stove. We've got the latch on the front. We can then open it. And you guys can see it is a very large stove body. I am going to cover specs in this video. I'll do dimensions and weight and whatnot, but I just want to show this portion of the stove to you guys so you can kind of get an idea of that. Now, there is one addition to this stove. I'm going to take the top back off because this is one way of burning the stove just as it is configured right here. If we take the top off, you'll notice that there is a screw up here like I've mentioned earlier. If I unscrew this screw, place it down on the table. Now you'll see that the damper is right there. So this is the exhaust of the stove. It does come with a titanium damper, or basically a baffle type system that is removable. So if you want that to be wide open, you can leave it wide open, or you could simply slide this piece of titanium into the groove and then replace the screw on the inside. Very easy, and now you have a baffled system. So if you guys can get a good look at that right there. Now your damper hole essentially is blocking some heat, and it'll also help break up some of the sparks that are going up and out the chimney by creating a reburn effect. So that is another way of burning the stove. Simply just pop that back on there, and like I said earlier, locking tabs in place, and now you have your baffle system installed in the stove. Now let's talk about the grill. So, well, kind of a stand. This can be used as a grill. I will mention that if you do set it in the holes and remove the lid, it can work as a grill, as an open fire pit. But basically, if you line these up with the holes that are corresponded there, we take our stays out of the plastic wrap. And this is all brand new. I've never burned in the stove before. I have burned in the prototype of this stove, however, and that's what kind of led to some of the changes that you see here today. So we have 2 titanium stays. Whoops. We'll thread this on here. Very, very easy, very friendly assembly and construction. They thread on there, and then we can thread this guy on here, and you can run the stove with or without these. You can bring 1 or 2 or none. It's totally up to you, but there is support right there for the stove. So if you're doing some cooking on top, you can put some food or a kettle or maybe some other cooking gear on the side. You can run it with the legs or without the legs. Just don't put heavy items on the rack if you're not using the legs. So you can see it's got a little bit of droop there. I typically just put light items, maybe a pair of gloves on the side, maybe a spoon or a fork, but generally you do want to use the legs. Very simple, very lightweight idea there. So let's get this stove off to the side just temporarily, and let's open up the accessory box and have a look at what's inside of there, because this is where things get really interesting. Okay, so now that we've taken a first look at the stove, and we're going to come back to this a little later on in the video, let's have a look at the accessory kit, because remember in the beginning of the video I said you can double stack this stove. That's exactly what this accessory is. Now this is sold with a stove only, accessory only, or as a bundle. It's totally up to you. Let's have a look at this. So again, just like the stove, it does have its own carry bag. The same construction, the same handles, nice Pomoly branding on there, very nice bag. So we'll get that out of the way. We do have another pair of cut gloves. So if you don't have enough, now you do. And we'll get the body of basically the extension out of the box, and then have two side panels here. We'll get this out of the way. And these are the other side panels, basically the exact same thing that I already have on the stove. So one side panel is solid, the exact same that is on the stove. And then we have another glass panel, which is the exact same panel that is on the stove. Now, if you do get both kits, so if you get the accessory kit and the stove, that does mean you can rotate these sides wherever you want. So if you want both glass on the bottom, you can put both on the bottom, or if you want both solid on the bottom, you can mix match them however you wish. I will say though, that these solid panels that have the holes in them with the vents, if you do put both on the bottom stove, it will burn very, very hot, because all the oxygen is going to come in through the bottom and burn upwards. And if you want it to burn a little more gentle, you can do one on one side, one on the other side. If you do that, I do recommend putting one solid side on this side and then one solid on the other side. So right now I have the solid on the bottom on that side. Once I put the top on, I put the solid on the top on this side. That way you get equal air introduction inside of the stove. So we have four sides, completely customizable wherever I want to put them. We'll move that off to the side. And then we have the stackable titanium portion of this. This is excellent. So this is very, very ergonomic. It's small, it's rather lightweight. It's really lightweight actually. And basically it's just the stove body that goes on top. So same operation, we're just gonna open the back, and then we're going to open the front. So this is the front, that's the back. There is another stove door on here, and we're going to get more into this once we get it all assembled and start burning and whatnot. But here's the back. So we do have an additional glass window in the rear of the stove on the second level. We got a good look at the side, we got a good look at the front. We got some nice logo in the glass there, kind of cut into the titanium, which is a nice touch. And basically how you assemble this is much the same way. So I'm going to put the glass on the opposite side. So let's put the glass on this side over here. And same idea, you just want to make sure everything lines up and everything locks into the corresponding tabs. And it's quite simple, making sure everything's lined up. And once it is all lined up, I have to turn this around to get a better look at what I'm doing here. Oh, there we go. Alright, so everything is lined up. You want to leave these locking tabs open, and that should give you an idea of a stove with no top or no bottom. Let's get these side racks off of the stove. I'm going to take the spark arrestor off, get these out of the way. To assemble this onto the stove, all you need to do is just remove the top lid. That's it. So we take the top lid completely off of the stove. We'll set that off to the side. We've got a lot going on here. And basically you just take the top, making sure everything's lined up. Take your time when you do this. That is all lined up. Simply put the top on the accessory portion now. locking in all 8 tabs, because there are 4 on the top lid and there are 4 on the stove holding the accessory onto the stove. So you want to make sure all 8 of those are secure. And there you have it, guys. We have a double stacked titanium wood stove for use in your tent or even just outside. So we've got the glass side on there. Now I did make a mistake. I put the glass on both sides. I'm actually going to reconfigure the glass once I actually start burning in the stove. But this is kind of neat showing you guys right now. You got the glass on one side. I got a glass window in the back. I've got 2 glass windows in the front. And then right now with this configuration, we've got the solid panels on this side. So this is a very interesting construction. Now you can still run the grills or the grates, the grill slash grate slash shelf table, whatever you want to call it. You can still run these on the side of the stove with the top configured on here, and there are holes on these tabs as well, and that's kind of an option for future upgrades. So you can still use the shelf, which makes a very large stove, a lot of cooking room, a lot of wood inside of the stove burning, making a tent very, very, very hot. So let's talk a little bit more about the top and some of the features a little more closely. Okay guys, so coming in for a closer look, we can see the Pomoly cuts right here on the sides. This is the double wall intake side panels. These are very strong, very functional as well. On the accessory portion, we do have a little tab here, and this is to run a guy line to the ground because the stove is a little tall and it may want to tip. So if you want to anchor that to the ground, that's basically a guy out point to run a guy line to the ground to help stop the stove from tipping if you are on uneven ground. Turning it around, looking at the front, you can see we do have the dual door system. We've got the bottom door, we've got the top door, and basically it is completely open on the inside. Now there may be an upgrade for a grate that is going to separate the top and the bottom stove. So when you load wood in the bottom, it'll be separate from loading wood into the top. But right now it is one massive open cavity. If you guys can see in the back, the window all the way in the top, right in the back. Very neat construction. The doors are both usable, both functional. I will mention though, if this is full of wood, you obviously don't want to open the bottom door. Wood will fall out, so you want to open the top. If it's completely full, load your wood in there. It'll fall down and burn all the way down, which gives you a ton of capacity for wood. Turning it over to the other side, you guys can see the both glass side panels. Again, we have another guy out tab right here for anti-tip. We then have all the locking tabs, and all in all, it is a very clever and very strong construction. Okay guys, so I'm going to cover some measurement specs for you today. If you're looking for more of the specs, the weight on each component, head on over to pomoly.com. Link will be in the description for the latest up-to-date specs. But for today, I'm going to cover the measurements because that is something I could do right here. The specs, as the stove has not been released, the specs may vary on the finalized production model. So let's talk about the measurements. So I'm going to measure from the table to the bottom of the stove, and we are coming in at 4 1/4 inches. So that's underneath of the stove. The width, which of course is the same for the top and the bottom, we're coming in at 7 3/4. For the height of the 2 stoves stacked together, we've got 13 1/4. For the depth, we're coming in at 15. And what am I missing? The doorways. Let's check the doorways here. The opening of the door is 5 3/4 by 5 13/16. The top door, of course, the width is roughly the same. We're at 5 and we're actually at 6 inches, sorry. Yeah, so the top door is a little bit wider. So we're at 6 inches wide, and we are coming in at 4 7/8 tall. Very nice doors. I really like the 2-door configuration. I got bugs in my face. The bugs here today are insane. So I've covered the height. Let's take the top off of here. Very simple. And let's talk about this stove just by itself. So if you were to get just this stove on its own, we're coming in at 10 about 11 inches tall. And of course the width and the depth would be the same. So all in all, those are the dimensions. The dimensions on the interior, I will mention this. So for your interior, the longest piece of wood that I was going to say the most length you can get, but the longest piece of wood that you can get in there is 14 3/4 safely to the bottom of the stove. Now keep in mind that halfway up there is a baffle or a reinforced wall in the rear, reducing that to 14 3/8 very easily to get wood inside of there. So that is a big chunk of firewood to put in there. And keep in mind, if you have the top, obviously you have double capacity to load wood inside, which is a ton of burning occupancy. I mean, you have a lot of room to burn, and it's not a width or length, it's a vertical room. So what that means is all the wood's going to collapse on itself. It's going to burn evenly. It's going to burn all of the wood. It's not going to have little ends of pieces of wood on this end of the stove or this end of the stove or on the outside that's not burned. Everything's going to burn down in a vertical fashion, which is going to burn very hot and very efficient. So let's get the sides reconfigured and let's just get this thing burning. So I am going to leave the baffle in the top of the lid, so through the damper, that little baffle, I'm going to leave that installed. I'm going to put both solid panels on, actually, you know what? I'm going to put one solid on the bottom, one glass on the bottom, and then I'm going to reverse the orientation, a solid on the top and a glass on the top. Get everything reconfigured, get it full of wood, and light it on fire. Okay guys, so I am going to be using the new spark arrestor, and I just want to stop real quick and show you guys how to assemble this. So you'll notice that on one side I do have the metal ring there, or the retention holder for your guy line, and then I have the other one there. Coming over to this triangle, it is not pushed in yet. So what you want to do is take a piece of metal and just push that in. Basically push that all the way in like that. Take the clip that comes with the stove, and you want to expand this. So you want to stretch it out just like that, and then place it in there and let it go. And basically it won't fall inwards and it won't fall outwards. It's there ready to go. And then in the bottom, those fingers are all bent in, so that'll prevent this from going all the way down the chimney pipe, giving you a spark arrestor with guy out lines. Alright guys, so here we are about 3.5 hours later. The stove is cooled down and disassembled, and I am very, very happy to announce that there is absolutely no warping on this stove. And I had to really, really look at every single piece to try and find some warping. Now, this is completely 1 millimeter thick of titanium. And the reason why I believe it did not warp is simply because these panels here are double walled. After closer inspection, looking at the inside panel, you can see that it is completely colored blue, purple, nice titanium colors. However, on the outside, it is still raw titanium. So the heat did not transfer through, but it did get very hot. So with this being a double wall construction wall, and the other wall being reinforced with the glass, it basically cannot warp because there's so much reinforcedness to the stove, as well as the back wall having that kind of plate in the back there. The door is obviously reinforced because all the folds and bends, and the door itself construction. The bottom is very, very solid. I have not been able to find any warping on this at all, and that is 100% honest. Even the lid, I cannot see any warping because everything is absolutely reinforced. Even this little tiny baffle is straight as an arrow. No warping on this stove anywheres. And I looked hard. I looked really hard because all the other stoves that are single walled, they do warp a little bit, and when they go back together, they go back together perfectly fine. But this, I had to really, really look, and it burned for a long time. And I thought something was strange because not everything changed color. So the back wall right here is slightly bronze. Down here is still titanium. Everywhere that gets the real brunt of the heat is either the lid, which did turn purple, but you'll notice that there is a distinct pattern of where the color changed, and that's due to the baffling underneath. So everything that really gets the brunt of the heat is either double walled or really, really reinforced. So I think it's going to probably take about 10 to 12 hours burn time in this to really get everything to change color. But so far today, I'm very, very happy. Now, I did discover a few small fun facts about the stove while I was just sitting here watching it burn. So let me just pop this back on here. Now that we've established that everything went well, there was no warping, I do want to show this because this is probably very interesting to some individuals. Me, myself, I typically go camping by myself, so this won't benefit me in any way, but let's have a look at this. Both of the doors to the bottom and the top are facing the camera. Now, if you're out camping with two people inside of a tent, or even maybe by yourself, let's say your sleeping area is on one side and your living area is on the other side. Well, you don't want to have to go all the way around just to open the door to load the stove. So you might get what I'm saying here. This lid can be turned this way or this way. So what that means is essentially you can, I would rather this be in the back of the stove. So you want the damper in the back. But what I'm saying is you can turn the top to face the other way. So you can simply turn this around. So now you have a door on both ends. So if I'm sleeping and I have a friend inside of the tent who's sleeping on the other side, and we're taking turns rotating, feeding the stove, one person can feed the stove from that side, the other person can feed the stove from this side, or if you have a sleeping area or living area, vice versa. Now I do want to strongly caution you, if this stove is completely full of wood, you don't want to open the bottom door because things can fall out. You really do want to load it from the top. But once you get to that stage in the night where you do need to load it, there might only be coals down on the bottom, so nothing will come rushing out. So you can actually open that door to load it from the bottom door. I did a few times while I was burning it. So that was one interesting thing that I found. The second interesting thing that I found is these little tiny tabs down on the bottom. Like I mentioned, these are little guy out points to guy out the stove while it's double stacked, just in case it is on uneven ground. They're the same little metal tabs that are on the spark arrestor. So these do come off very easily. You just simply pinch it together and pull it out through the hole. So if you removed both of those tabs on either side, and let's put the top back on the stove. And this is very interesting. And we lock it down. Essentially, we have a wood stove with no floor. This one is a little tight. I'm gonna have to loosen that one off because I actually tightened it up when I was installing it because there was a loose nut there and I think I over tightened it. So I'm gonna loosen that off a little bit because it doesn't seem, oh there it goes. So some of the hardware you do need to kind of loosen and tighten, just kind of get a feel for the stove before you burn it. I should have mentioned that earlier. I did go through every nut and bolt on the stove and tighten what I thought needed to be tightened because during shipping things do get bumped around. So back to what I was kind of pointing out here. Essentially right now you have a wood stove with no floor. Well, you still have a wood stove because if I were down on the beach and I had sand or gravel, I could plant this down on the ground and I could burn inside of it. So I could literally open the front door and I could feed wood inside of there and have a stove on the beach and have a wood stove with no floor, which saves a lot of weight. So that is an interesting thing that I was just sitting here looking and I thought, geez, you could run this with no floor if you were on a surface that was not going to burn, such as grass, wood. If you had a flat surface of rock, gravel, pebbles, sand, whatever, because it is a very lightweight system. This does not weigh a lot. And then if you wanted to lighten the load even more, you could leave the glass panel home and bring both solid panels, slide both solid panels in there, and have a very strong reinforced stove and run it with no floor, because essentially, if I can get this pulled out of here, essentially this is just a skeleton frame. It is both 1 millimeter thick. It is very, very reinforced. It's got all kinds of riveting. It is very, very strong, yet it's still lightweight because there's no bottom. So I thought that was a really neat idea. I may experiment with that in the future, running this with no floor, mashing it down in the sand, and just having a fire right there on the sand inside of the tent. So I thought that was kind of an option to some people who may want to tinker with that. I certainly might in the future. But all in all, everything on the stove is totally still usable. There's no warping on here. I just want to mention that because I was actually really shocked myself to have no warping at all. Now, the bottom of the stove, I will mention, because I did not cover this earlier, it is also reinforced. So that's the reason why there's no warping underneath the floor, because it does have that reinforced vented double area of titanium. So effectively there are 2 layers, just like the underside of the lid. So that does increase the overall weight. Now, like I said earlier, I'm not going to touch on all of the specs because I want this video to be usable for viewers even after maybe version 2 of the stove comes out. You guys can see the functionality, and the weight is going to vary. So I don't like hammering down numbers on weight on videos like this because I want it to still be relevant in the future, even if the weight does change. So head on over to Pomoly.com to get all of those specs. But all in all, this is a beautiful stove, and I'm very happy to add it to my collection. That is all I've got. So if you guys have any questions or comments, drop them down in the comment section, and I'll do my very best to answer them. I'm out of here. So peace out, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.